there was a moment that I had a conversation with my mom where she was apparently talking to me. I don't remember this conversation at all. She said, "Do you really want to go and do this?" And apparently I said, "I don't remember this," but I said something along the lines of, like, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back. I'm going to get this over with so I can move on with the rest of my life." But the mindset of me before that and who I am now was so wildly different.
Hmm.
Back then at the very beginning, my mindset was I have expectations placed on me. I have to live up to these expectations. I have to go out and do this thing, and then I'll follow the set path that I was given. The moment that I came back, that really like shifted everything. It's like I'm in control of my life. I'm the one who gets to decide where I go, what I do, and it's hard for me to put exact words on it, but it felt so freeing.
Hello, all you polymathic people. I am Dustin, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Orion Siebert. He is a podcast host of the Cast of All Trades podcast, an author, content creator, inventor, and generalist. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on. This is going to
Yeah.
be a good time for both of us, so let's make the most of it.
Welcome to the Polymath Polycast, highlighting your multidisciplinary life, showcasing that it's okay to do many different things. It's definitely interesting, too, talking to someone with a very similar show.
hmm Yeah, I saw like I was going through Matchmaker and seeing like, oh, what are some other people like me? Since I feel
Mhm.
like getting to this space of one podcasting, but also polymath and generalist and jack of all trade stuff. It's like there's so few people sort of in this space. It's like
Yeah.
someone like me, someone who can understand. Please connect.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. There's only a few content creators I can even think of, and one of them I'm pretty friends with. I had her on my show a couple times, went on her show a couple times. Actually, I have a meeting with her this week, Dr. Angela Catalesa. I'll link you guys up after this because you guys are both going to be really cool to talk to. And it's interesting how we are probably the biggest polymath people, but you're one of the, like, you have a jack of all trades show. Again, same space though. It's interesting
hmm
seeing some people in the multi passionate space or multi potentialites. And I think that jack of all trades, generalist, and polymath, there's a scale to it. So I was like, before I
hmm
got into questions, I just wanted to tell you this because I think you would get a kick out of it. I created the multidisciplinary spectrum to kind of show how people can level up to polymaths using, like, based on how many areas of expertise do you have and how deep are you in them. So
hmm
a multi-potentialite, multi-passionate, they're just getting started kind of thing. You're the potential to do many different things, pluripotent. So I kind of have them towards the beginning. I kind of see a jack of all trades as a more of a jack of many novices, or maybe some skill to it, because you have like
hmm
15 different areas perhaps, but you have not too deep into them. There's plenty of jack of all trades who are deeper, and those are more like T-shaped people, but
hmm
generally a jack of all trades is a bit more lower. And then you have a generalist, which is a bit deeper, maybe medium level in 6 areas or something like that. They started finding the ones they like, because once you dabble, you say like, oh, I like this cookie more, I like this cookie more. You dig into those jars more. And then polymath and so forth. So nice little scale there based on how many areas.
Interesting. I've never heard of a scale like that, but kind of makes sense to me. But yeah, interesting.
The way I usually like to break the ice without having like a little side tangent there is like to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Oh boy, something that no one knows about me. Well, uh, I guess I started my jack of all trades journey like maybe 5, 6, 7-ish years ago
Mm-hmm.
on sort of on a whim. One day I sat down and I was just scrolling online. One of my favorite websites of all, Instructables, a great DIY website where you can see other people's cool projects of look at what random thing this person made. It's like, oh, that's fun, that's cool. And for some reason, like it wasn't even on my screen at the time, but the idea popped into my head of I want to make an electric violin. I
Okay.
don't play the violin. Like there's absolutely no reason that should have popped into my head, but for some reason that day it said, okay, I guess I'm doing this now. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, just sort of like I spent 3 months learning everything I possibly could about the violin, like how they're made, the types of wood, the exact
Mm-hmm.
sizes, the different kinds, the names of each part of the instrument, the insides, outsides, sort of the history of it. I even had a couple friends who played, so I asked them if I could borrow their violins to take measurements of it. I had no idea what I was doing or what I was measuring, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of just making it up as I went. 3 months go by and I have this massive pile of research of this is what a violin is. Okay, what do I do with this now? And I take that and I've been telling people along the way that, hey, I want to do this thing. I want to make an electric violin. And I had a grandpa like figure in my life. He brought me over to his house. He brought me to his garage and he said, my wife wants me to get rid of all this wood in this garage here. So take your pick of anything here. And there were some really nice pieces in there. It's like some nice walnuts, some nice dark oak, some nice cherry wood. It's like, ooh, this stuff could be really expensive if I were to go out and buy it. So I
Yeah.
got some nice pieces of wood. I drew up my blueprints, and over the following 3 months, I learned how to use the tools. I learned how to piece things together. I learned the basics of like audio acoustics, of the physics of audio, and how this all works together. And over those 3 months, and after a number of failures and many snapped violin necks, I
Hmm.
finally put together a electric violin, and that was my first like real big project of, ooh, there's potential here. Like
Yeah.
I can do cool stuff. But I guess that's like the big thing that people in my life personally know me for. But most people, it's like that's a fun way to introduce myself, I guess.
Definitely goes into that whole inventor side of you. And polymathic people in general are always very curious, but pursuing that curiosity, especially to the degree that you did, and you took a level of tenacity to do the research and do kind of the hard work, finding out what woods do best, what's the physics of the sound inside the violin, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, it was a fun process for me where
Mhm.
definitely I since I that was the first big project I did, and by the end it looked like a horrible piece of garbage, let me tell
Oh
you.
no.
But it was functional. That was the main point. I was
Yeah.
happy to have a functional piece at the very end of it. May have looked horrible, but it worked, and that sort of pushed me down the hill of, if I can do this, what else can I do? That
Yeah.
sort of led me down that whole polymathic jack of all trades generalist road, I guess.
There were so many different things I wanted to jump off of there, but this is an interview for you. So I'm curious more about what was your mindset 5 years ago and how have you changed since then, given how you just described that change in your life. Were there other ones that brought up different changes in you?
Sure, if I were to look back 5 years before I dive into that, if you do
Yeah.
have anything that you just want to jump on, like that would be interesting to dig into more, please, I'm all ears. I'm happy to go off the cuff on this.
Yeah. Oh, this show goes
But
on tangents all the time. I just wanted to make sure I don't share, like, I always try to balance out the personal anecdotes from you and to me because it's an interview about you. If I have something I'm really prudent, though, I always still share it.
yeah. Anyways, 5 years ago, so
Mhm.
I just last week, I just graduated college with a bachelor's in business management. And 5 years ago, I was just graduating high school, and the mindset there was so different from the person I am today. Like at that point, I had just finished up maybe my second or third project.
Mhm.
After the violin, I went on a little string of musical instruments where I did the violin, then a bamboo flute. I did a clarinet for a friend. I did a couple other ones in there. But growing up all my life, I was raised Mormon or LDS, and when you graduate high school, it's generally expected that you go and serve a 2 year mission for the church.
Mhm.
You put in your papers, you uh, go do a couple rituals to prepare yourself for it, and then you are sent off to either Provo or some other missionary training center around the world.
Mhm.
And growing up all my life, it was sort of instilled in me of, this is what's expected of you to do. You hit a certain age, you get baptized, you grow up, you get other, like you participate in other rituals in the church. Eventually you get to 18 and you graduate high school and you go out and serve this mission. And that was deeply instilled in my mind. Like, I have to do this thing because it's what's expected of me.
Mhm.
And that's not the mindset that people generally recommend going into it. And I didn't even realize it at the time, where there was a moment that I had a conversation with my mom where she was apparently talking to me. I don't remember this conversation at all, but we talked about this later. But she said, "Do you really want to go and do this?" And apparently I said, "I don't remember this," but I said something along the lines of, "I have to go and do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back. I'm going to get this over with so I can move on with the rest of my life," which doesn't exactly sound like
Sit
the
well.
mindset of
Yeah.
someone who wants to go and do something.
Yeah.
But all my life I'd thought, I have to do this thing. My brother went and did it. My dad went and did it. It's like basically everyone in my immediate circle, it's like, you go and do this thing because that's what's expected of you.
Mhm.
So that's what I did. I put in my papers. I was called to go and serve in Argentina in the Buenos Aires area. And I went down to Mexico to learn more Spanish, to be able to teach the language, to learn the language, be able to teach our gospel. And then
Mhm.
went down to Argentina, and instantly it hit me of, oh, I don't want to do this, of like so many things stacked on top of each other where it just became too much for me to handle. That's also when we learned, so I have a little thing called sensory processing disorder where like sound become like loud noise for other people causes instant migraines for me, or
Mhm.
lots of physical contact makes my skin feel like it's on fire. and other weird sensory things. And that's where we really put a name on that down there. We've always known something was kind of weird, but down there, like people greet you with big hugs and kisses on the cheek. There was constant screaming of kids,
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that just made me in particular feel like I was dying constantly. So about 3-ish months in, I say, I can't do this anymore. I have to leave.
Yeah.
And no, this is supposed to last for 2 years. And there's a big stigma of people coming home early from their mission, especially in the like Mormon church culture. For the most part, that's unheard of for most people. Like kind of a running gag, I guess. Maybe it's not the best
Mm.
way to put it. Of you come home from early from your mission, people will say, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" or what happened? You couldn't handle it." And that's like a lot of those thoughts are running through my mind. And I know it sounds bad coming now with very little context, but
No, it's important though.
yeah, I end up coming back from my mission early, and luckily I came back with a lot of support of people understanding like, hey, you know what was going on there. If you said it wasn't good for you, you know what's best for you. So I had a lot of support from people coming
Good.
back, which I loved, which is so great. But that left me at a crossroads that I wasn't expecting, because I was expecting to be gone for like 2 years. I wasn't expecting to come back in a couple months, and suddenly the university I'd applied to that said, yeah, you can go ahead and defer your enrollment for 2 years to serve your mission, said, well, we can't cancel your deferment. So you can either reapply or you can wait the 2 years and come when you're supposed to.
Mm.
And said, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to stick around here. And it's like, well, what are my options now? My doors are all open to me. And this is really the first time in my life when I thought to myself, wow, this is the first time I really have like I actively saw I have a decision to make of I can do so many things right now. It's limitless opportunities. And that point, I happened to stumble across one of my old university accounts that I had like one of the universities I had applied to, but said like I had called them. I had explicitly called them and said, I'm not going to come to the school. You can cancel my account. I
Mm.
happened to go onto that website again, and they never canceled my account. So I was able to register for classes that week to start the next semester. So that's what I did. I registered for classes, and in a few months, January 1st, I flew out to Utah to go to
Nice.
Utah Valley University, and I did my schooling here. But the mindset of me before that and who I am now was so wildly different.
Mhm.
Back then at the very beginning, my mindset was I have expectations placed on me. I have to live up to these expectations. I have to go out and do this thing, and then I'll follow the set path that I was given. The set path was grow up, get baptized, go do more rituals for this church, go serve a mission, come back, go to Brigham Young University, get married and have kids and push them through the same system and just keep
Yeah.
going. But that the moment that I came back, that really like shifted everything. It's like I'm in control of my life. I'm the one who gets to decide where I go, what I do, and that really changed it to like it's hard for me to put exact words on it, but it felt so freeing.
Yeah. So your set path was much more religiously uh, focused, and that's where a lot of people end up coming from as well. But there's
Hmm.
something we talk about on the show quite a bit, and that's the whole past 100 years. Society has pushed us more towards specialism. Like
Hmm.
you get one job, you stick with that one job, or mainly one skill, maybe that one job. And that's because we needed to be cogs in the wheel. And for the most part of the industrial revolutions, they needed specialists. But all throughout our history, there's been generalists, and over the last 20 years, we've definitely seen the rise of more and more generalists. And it's interesting to think about how a lot of people think their set path is specialism, like that's what they're told to do. And we're seeing a lot of people like you or I, especially in this case of like we make content around being this way, but seeing like, oh, I don't have to go down this set path. I can be more generalist or generalistic, I guess you could say, or more jack of all trades kind of lifestyle and dabble in many different things, and it's okay. And because I dabble, I get to find the stuff I actually really enjoy.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Uh, do you know what the original purpose of the university was?
It was supposed to be continuing education, like it's higher education, like pushing past original boundaries and trying to learn new things.
Sort of. It's actually in the name. University, universal man.
Hmm.
They were originally made to create someone who was the generalist. They were originally made to create the universal man who could go out into the world and be adept at basically anything. But as time went on, and as you're saying, people are now funneled towards being a specialist, and it's well meaning. It makes sense. Like, I understand why parents and advisors push their kids, push people to say, yes, I want to be in this one specific thing, because I get it. Like, they're well meaning and they try their best to guide people down this path. But originally, the university was to make this universal man, the person who could go out and do anything, to be in any aspect of a society. But as we've grown and deepened our knowledge across many different spectrums, we couldn't have people going to universities and taking literally every single class, because that would
Mm-hmm.
take, I mean, most most 4-year degrees actually take 5 or 6 years now in the US. But if you were to imagine going to school and trying to take every single class at a university, how long do you think that would take?
Yeah, it would take way too long, decades if not longer. The Homo
Mm-hmm.
universalis is what I think you're referring to.
Mm-hmm. Something like that. I'm
Yeah,
really bad at the terminology of it, but
I like terms.
mhm, yeah. But it's this idea that I understand why we have specialities in many cases. Like, in some cases, absolutely, I want a specialist to work with me. If you're going to the medical field and you are going to be performing the same surgery over and over and over again, I
Mhm.
would rather that be your specialty than someone who dabbles in a bunch of different areas of surgery. If I really need this one, like, always, if I need one very specific thing, it makes sense to have a specialist. But in the individual life, I feel like it makes more sense to be the generalist. Work with specialists, be the generalist, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with you. It reminds me of a story. I don't know if it was in David Epstein's book Range or maybe some other media that I found, but there was a story about like a situation where a person had like a heart problem. Like the doctors kept pushing him to go to like a cardiac specialist, and like the doctors were like, "You need a heart surgery now. Like that's what you need. Very invasive. Like you need it immediately. That's the problem. That's what's causing all your symptoms." And the guy happened to be going to the doctor around the time some kind of uh, event for cardiologists. Was it cardiologists? I think yeah. Basically,
Yeah, I think that's right.
heart doctors had a conference, so a lot of them were out for a couple days. And a guy came into a general practitioner,
Hmm.
and the GP was like, "Hey, actually, I don't think it's your heart that's the problem. I think it's actually down in like your esophagus or lung or something like that, or maybe it could be like a gut thing." He said it was basically in a whole different area, and the problem that he was facing had nothing to do with the heart, but the cardiologist thought it was the heart. So he was going to have to get this really invasive and life-threatening procedure because that's what the specialist was telling him to do. Because the specialist had only had that narrow view, like this is what it is. Whereas the
Hmm.
GP was able to see it in a bigger picture and realize that's not what the problem actually was. That was manifesting as a heart problem, but that wasn't what it actually was.
As the saying goes, to a hammer, every problem is a nail.
Yeah.
That is one of the downsides of being a specialist, where if you are hyper trained in this one thing, you start to
Mhm.
see every problem as, I can solve that with this one skill that I happen to have developed very well, which kind of makes sense. If you've trained this one skill, you want to believe somewhere in you that it can solve every problem or can solve almost every problem, or that the problem is more prevalent than it might actually be.
Mhm.
Mhm.
All right. What motivated you to start making content, especially around the jack of all trades and generalist?
I love listening to podcasts so
Mhm.
much. I cannot tell you how many hours of podcasts I've listened to. And there's something about it that I thought to myself every time, almost every time, I wish I was sitting in on these conversations. I
Mhm.
wish I could talk to these interesting people. Like, there are so many ideas that get brought up. And if I'm being totally honest, uh, going into university, like, I started with mechanical engineering and eventually switched to business. But almost everything that I learned in business in school, I learned previously from audiobooks and from podcasts because
Mhm.
of how many hours I dedicated to listening to podcasts. And there's something to this medium that I love so much. I love the idea of being able to just talk, not having to always worry about video stuff, even though you are doing a video podcast now. Personally, I much prefer just the audio side. There's something about being able to eloquently express your thoughts and just doing it in this style that it
Mhm.
feels so right to me. Yeah, it's once again, it's hard for me to totally explain,
No,
but
I think I get it. I might be able to help a little bit. just to interject a tiny bit here, my other show, I talk to content creators, and generally there's this trifecta. There's audio, written, and video, and generally
Mhm.
people find like if you're a modern creator, you generally do all three for the most part. Like you get to that point where you're like, okay, I can transcribe my podcast into blog posts and add my own 2 cents there, or I can make a visualizer out of the podcast and make a video. But like you start from one and you end up finding that one of these really resonates with you. So I've made over 250 videos over around the same amount of podcasts, and I've made 570 blog posts. And so a lot of people see me on camera. They see like, okay, he's good on camera. Like he likes being on camera. Like, sure, I do enjoy video. That's why I do these interviews in video, because there's people like me who like to see. Like right now, I'm doing my hand gestures. They want to see that. They want to see you, Orion, talking, and see how, like your style. Like you have a unique style. You have a unique like presence. But there's other people who just want to listen. They just want to be on the treadmill or go for a walk and hear these two voices in their ears and see what they're saying. And I get what you're saying too when it comes to like you saw or you heard these podcasts and you're like, I wish I was part of that conversation. I wish I was able to add my 2 cents to that. I remember seeing a lot of big creators back in the day, like doing interviews like Gary Vee or something like that. And I was like, I want to do interviews too. I had no idea how to actually get started doing it. I had a podcast for a few years, but I just wanted to tell you because you mentioned Matchmaker at the beginning. Like
Mhm.
Matchmaker is how I started doing interviews. I finally got a chance to just get that connection going. And yeah, but I get you. It's one of those things where it's more natural to you to make.
Absolutely, because I actually started off originally doing blog posts maybe, oh, I want to say it was 3-ish years ago with my first attempt at blogging and writing online, and I found I wasn't actually a big fan of it. I started off with I made a whole website for it because I thought this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get a website domain, make a website from scratch, then start blogging on there. What I totally forgot was the whole marketing and the whole
Yeah.
like trying to grow an audience aspect of it. And that first blog was actually me taking my Dungeons and Dragons adventures that I was playing through with my friends and transcribing it into a sort of blog adventure fiction adventure blog. Let's go with
Mhm.
that. It's probably the best way to put it. And I did that for a while. Don't get me wrong, it was fun to do, but I wasn't enjoying it. If that makes any sense. Like it was good for me to do. I loved being able to go back through these adventures that I had with my friends and post it on there, but it wasn't good blog content. It wasn't good
Mhm.
written content. So I stopped that, shut it down for a while. I came back to writing online again with some stuff on medium.com or .org. I don't remember if it's .com or .org, but I
It's
started
definitely
writing
medium.
on there again, and it was all right. It was fun. Like I put some articles up there, and like I eventually did come back to writing more consistently online and trying to do that, but I found my own methods and tools of doing it that just work for me, where I still make the podcast first and foremost, because, like you said, it's my preferred medium of
Mhm.
communication, content creation. I like that. Oh, there's a quote of it of podcasting is the ultimate single player experience. It's since you don't really talk about the podcasts you listen to with friends, at least most people do. Most people don't. I like to share my podcast with people and talk about random stuff I'm listening to. But when you think about the podcast, it's literally just you and the two people in your ears or the one person in your ears for anywhere from half an hour to upwards of 4 or 5 hours for some podcasts. And it's just you and them. There's such
Mhm.
an intimate connection there that I feel like you just can't get anywhere else.
I definitely like having that connection too. There's been plenty of times where there's an author, Robert Greene, who I just really love his works and just being able to learn from him. And he's been prolific on podcasts, and so I've actually went out of my way to listen to pretty much every appearance I can from him because he adds something different. There's this kind of notion as a guest when you're going on a show, whether you're doing a keynote or you're just doing a podcast or you're just making content, that like eventually you could ask that same question over and over and over again. You start to make a formula on how you're going to answer it. And so, like, who are you? What do you do? That kind of thing. And so, what I notice is that for a lot of people, they'll go into a show and they kind of say the same thing just in different
Hmm.
ways, and they start to refine it. And it's a good thing. We do need that. But it kind of goes back to the specialist versus generalist, too. That means that, like, I knew a guy who was one of 45 podcasts. 30 of them were basically all the exact same because they asked him the exact same questions. When I had him on my show, I went out of my way to ask him new questions because that's kind of what the point of this show is more about, anyways, finding the new things, but or like the bridges between different things. And so it was one of those things where I tried to give him a new experience, and I think that led to a more intimate connection there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
like going on to different shows and having different questions being asked. Like I try to do the same thing when I bring people on my shows. I try to find every piece of content I can about them.
Yeah.
What have they already been asked? What are the 5 stories they repeatedly go through? And then see what are the unique questions, even if it's just 1 or 2 unique questions that'll get them to light up.
Hmm.
Like it's those 1 or 2 questions that can make all the difference.
One of my guests, I think in like season 3 or something like that, he was actually a prolific content creator. So I used to, when I had more time, this is back, 2020, 2021. So there was a lot of time to do stuff.
All the
I
time in
would,
the world, baby.
yeah, I would go through their entire blog. I maybe not read every single post, but I would look for all the posts that were most relevant or most interesting and try to read as many as possible. Or I'll do the same with their podcast, listen to many different episodes, or watch most of their YouTube channel just at a higher speed or something like that. Or even like read their book or dissertation or something that I could do to get a very deep uh, mindset of like who this person is. And now I do like a lot more efficient way of doing things. I just look at their entire online presence and pull from different posts. But this guy who I was trying to interview, he had too much content for me to even do that normal strategy I was doing back then. And even now, I would actually still have to approach him differently just because of how much he had put out over the decade and a half. And so what I ended up doing too, I remember going on his Instagram and just scrolling through because he had a it was a personal brand, so he had a lot of personal posts on there scattered about. I scrolled down like 4 years, 5 years, and I found one picture. Like this is the one moment I saw in all his content where he mentioned his hero, and it was the CEO of Microsoft. And I managed to make a question based around that one little detail, and it made him feel very appreciated and seen. And like I was really happy to be able to do that for him. But it's like you said, like finding the details like that.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
I don't know. I don't have much to really add on that. You summed it up quite well.
Okay. Well, well, and then so can you tell me about your show, Cast of All Trades, and what it's about?
Sure. I try to narrow it down to this one line. Cast of All Trades is a show about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity.
Mm.
When I think about the jack of all trades, the Renaissance man, my mind instantly goes to Leonardo da Vinci, of the avid inventor, the biologist, the scientist, philosopher, mathematician.
Hmm.
Like if you go back and see some of his drawings and some of his sketches, they are fascinating to see what technologies would come down the line. And no doubt, if he had access to some of the tech that we had today, he would be deeply enthralled in creating robots or creating other things. Because you can find pictures that he drew of robots that we now today can still go back on and see that would actually kind of work.
Yeah,
And it's amazing to see what this guy did from oh
laser
um,
physics, like optical
mhm.
anatomy, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing what he did with the limited knowledge that he had by bringing together so many pieces of information. But anyways, back to the idea of so
Mhm.
the show Cast of All Trades. It's a show that I spun up sort of on the idea that I don't want to be shoehorned into any one space. I
Mhm.
wanted a show where I could talk to people about their what they care about, their specialties, their things, their skills, bring them on to see how can I 80/20 my way to get pretty good at this one thing that you're really good at, that you've dedicated your life to. And by doing that, I've been able to bring on some really fascinating people. I've been able just in this past, so I like to batch my content.
Okay.
So like this current week that we're recording this, I have I think 3 or 4 interviews lined up with people of wildly different backgrounds, just because like hey, you have an interesting skill that I want to learn more about,
Mhm.
and you may be a specialist in this, but you're kind of the best person I can learn from to learn this very specific skill. Then I can take that and apply it in other areas and skill stack and say, get pretty good at this skill, get pretty good at this other skill, and add these together to get a very unique set of skills that work together in a way that perhaps makes me stand out more than if I were to be just a specialist in this one very niche thing. So that's one aspect where I bring other people onto the show. Sorry to cut you off there. Yeah. Um, then the other aspect is where I do more solo episodes, where this is me sort of putting on my philosopher's cap for a bit, where
Mhm.
I love asking questions. I every week I have a question of the week, and I've been doing this for the past 2-ish years or so, where it can be either a very deep, like hyper philosophical question about I don't know, nothing comes to mind right now because I'm putting myself on the spot. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Um, or it could be some totally nonsensical question that I just dive into super deep and still get a lot of interesting topics out of it. such as one I did somewhat recently. I don't think the episode's live yet, but it's an episode that I did on a question: what would you do if money didn't matter?
Mhm.
And when asked that question, a lot of people respond with, okay, they think the question is something along the lines of, if money didn't matter to me, where price is no object. That's how they quickly interpret it off the cuff. And I think, what if you interpreted that differently? What if you talked about it if money didn't matter in three ways? There could be hyperinflation, where your money is literally worthless. I have a chance to do a deep dive on hyperinflation and what becomes
Mhm.
valuable in that situation. What about, say, money is no value because we have artificial intelligence and robots and universal basic income, where money is no value roughly equates like all of your basic needs are met, which kind of a stretch, but it's also just a fun way for me to explore new topics and new concepts. And finally, there's that idea of money, price is no object, where then we dive into that and the psychology of goal setting, of getting the things that you want,
Mhm.
and how maybe you don't want price to be no object, where you want to work hard to get different things. And that spawned like an hour and a half long episode from this one very stupid niche question.
No, it's stupid though. I took a similar question myself even at one point. I'm not sure if it follows one of those three or if it's a secret fourth one or whatnot. But like I guess if money was no object, like if that wasn't a blocker, it was more of a different approach, I guess. But essentially I thought about like where do I want to live in the world? Like what are the qualities of an area that I want to like the climate, the people, the places that I could go to? What are the factors I want to look for in a place to live and not really worry about how am I going to get there and what's the cost of living there, like how I'll make it happen somehow, some way. Like, so money is not the object. I just need to figure out which places to tricks all the boxes. And I did an experiment probably 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm still not quite there where I want to be, but it definitely helped me narrow down. Like, I don't want to go anywhere north because I don't want to deal with the cold. I already cut out a lot of it. Like, even New York and Seattle, like, it's too gray, too cold. And then like things like, okay, I might like California's weather and people, but the cost of living there is too high. It's to the point where money does matter. It's like San Francisco is just so outrageously like priced that I just it won't work. So there's certain things about that, but then yeah, it was a nice mental exercise. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I want to do. I want to not only like develop skills, talk to experts, or share
Mhm.
my experiences learning, developing skills. Since in my mind, being a jack of all trades or a polymath, since I like to group all these things together into one main thing, it's not just being good at a bunch of things. It's also having a certain mindset of being able to, it's not just skills that you have, it's ideas that you have. It's being able to cultivate a mind that spawns innovation. And sometimes that means asking silly questions and going super deep in them, even though no
Mhm.
one would ever want to do that. And you get some really interesting results from it.
It's interesting too because whenever you are talking about all these different terms, I actually used to call that spectrum I created the polymath spectrum because I consider that if Jekyll trades generalist, you're just polymathic at different levels, if it makes sense. But the
Mhm.
thing is, this still kind of makes it more polymath centric, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be inclusive to anybody who, like, people identify with multidentialite, they identify with Jackal trades, and that's the term they chose to be how they market themselves, how they share themselves. And so I thought this multidisciplinary spectrum made it a little bit more open minded about that. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I
That's
think
it.
it's great.
Like Jackal Chase is the term you chose, Polymath's the term I chose. I have a friend who loves multipotentialites. We're all part of the same world.
Cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. And again, like you said, it's a mindset thing, and there's a imbued curiosity too.
Exactly. That's really what want to drive home. It's following curiosity. That's the last thing on my list. There's developing skills, exploring ideas, but ultimately it's always following curiosity. Because if you're
Mhm.
not curious and you're not having fun following what you want to do, then like, okay, it's not all that interesting.
Yeah.
It's not fun. If you're not having fun, what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, you got to enjoy life. So you said on your profile, in 99% of situations, it's better to be a jack of all trades than a specialist. Can you explain why that is, do you think?
So in almost any situation, so if you could give me a random situation, just anything
I
that
find
comes to mind.
myself, I walk into a bar.
You walk into a bar, you are compare yourself. So if one person is a specialist, that person is probably dedicating themselves to their work. Like that is becomes their identity. Like say you're an accountant, people will almost always identify with the work that they do. When they introduce themselves, they'll almost first thing guaranteed, aside from this is my name, they'll say, this is my name, this is what I do.
Mhm.
and that almost becomes their personality to some extent, where they're so dedicated to their jobs or to other things. Sure, they might talk about some of their hobbies, but most of their life is spent dedicated from 9 to 5, 40 hours a week to this career. That becomes their personality. And they're so much less interesting to talk to.
Yeah.
So much less, like, you can talk to them for a bit and you feel you understand who they are in the span of 5, 10 minutes. I don't know how many times I've walked into a room and started a conversation with someone where I feel like I understand this person's entire life and their entire belief system in the span of 5 to 10 minutes, because they do one thing and that's
Mhm.
it. Compare that to the generalist or the jack of all trades or the polymath, whatever you want to call it. You walk into a bar and you are possibly the most interesting person in that room now, because you do a bunch of stuff. One of my personal goals is to be able to have a conversation with anyone about anything.
Mhm.
So to do that, that means I have to be good at asking questions to see, what does this person know? What do they do? To see what do they latch onto? Like, what are their hobbies? If I can suddenly, like, out of nowhere, like, perhaps they know me as the person who makes musical instruments, but I can suddenly have a deep conversation with them about, like, the history of jazz or the history of a
Mhm.
certain piece of art. It's like, hold on a second, why do you know that? Suddenly
Yeah.
become much more interesting. When I talk to fellow polymaths or jack of all trades, sure, I have a good understanding of who they are just because we're in the same space, but I feel like there's so much missing there of, I could talk to this person for hours on end because I have no idea what this person knows or who this person is. So that's generally my thoughts on it.
Kind of going off of that too, like if I walk into the bar, it's probably a karaoke bar. I've been going to karaoke for 10 years now, and I actually ran karaoke just the other night for one of
Do
my
you have any
jobs.
favorite songs?
I do, and we can get to that in a moment. But the point is, I go in there and people know me as the karaoke guy. And but then there was one point where I was talking to this, I think master's, not PhD, but master's girl around psychology, and we were having a deep conversation about psychology. And then there was another point where I was talking to somebody about traveling and like having a deep conversation about what do you do in this like a different environment like that, and how do you go about doing things. There was another night where I speak Spanish pretty well. Back then, this is around I was like 22, so it was a while back, but it was interesting because even though I speak Spanish well, I'm not super confident a lot of the times because I can't always hear the words. Like I'll hear it, I have to translate it in my head. Like sometimes I just can't hear what they're saying. I can speak it, I just can't really understand it as well as easily. And I
Sí, yo
remember being,
entiendo.
see, yo puedo, pero like entender, not always. But the thing is, there was one night I was inebriated because of the karaoke, and I remember seeing this group of three people, a boyfriend and girlfriend. The girlfriend was Colombian but from the U.S., and then she had a cousin who was Colombian from Colombia. And I remember flirting with her in Spanish and having a deep conversation in Spanish, despite the fact I don't know the vocabulary very well. But my point is, I was able to have that random moment because of that this skill that I have had. Yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Yeah,
being able to jump
exactly.
between different things.
Yep. By being able to cultivate, like, even some foundational level of knowledge across different spaces, you don't have to
Mhm.
be super deep in everything. Like, certainly, like, when I talk about polymath and jack of all trades and generalist stuff, I don't advocate to be, like, just base level on a bunch of different things as possible. I like having sort of a mountain structure
Mhm.
where it's, you have a bunch of stuff that's at a base level, but then you have a couple things that you are very knowledgeable about, where in a way you are specializing, sort of, but you're getting deep on a couple topics. Since mountains have a number of peaks, you're going to have a number of things you're going to be super good on. You're going to have a number of troughs that maybe you could work on if you wanted to, but that's sort of how I look at it. When you have
Yeah,
those mountains and valleys and, like, your base level stuff, it's like, okay, you can get along with almost anyone that way.
I think you would like my Polymath newsletter because one of the things I talk about too is the juggling approach versus the serialized approach. And the serialized is more specialist. Like you focus on one thing, then you move on to the next thing, then you move on to the next thing. And by the time you're 40 or something like that, you have multiple different deep specialties. That's because you switch between them. And there's micro versions of that. It's like you might focus on just a few, like a quarter of the year on one thing or something like that. It doesn't have to be decades, but you get what I mean. Like it's narrowed down, but eventually you have multiple because you've done it for so long. And then there's the juggling approach where it's more of a jack of all trades, where you are spreading yourself and you're dabbling in many different things, and eventually you do it for long enough, and you might be doing 8 different things, but you do it for long enough, those 8 different things become much deeper. It just takes a while too. And so talking about that duality or dichotomy is interesting.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but now that you mention it, I probably definitely do more with the juggling approach.
Mhm. And I find that there's a key point of actually doing both. At least from my perspective, it seems like both are pretty useful, especially like there's some years where if you go back to that 80-20 rule, 80% of the time you might be doing the juggling, where you 80% of your time you're just dabbling many different things. But then you might spend 20% of your time on a main focus. And in the next year, it switches. So that 80% of your time you're focusing on that one focus you did the last year. And then the 20% of your time you're going wide. And last year, actually in particular, I tried doing 33, 33, 34, and splitting my time almost equally between those three areas. And it's interesting how when you try to manage your time with that level of precision, your actions do change. It's much more time management focused, but again, it's curious.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Never really thought
Um,
about it before.
yeah. Well, there's something I ask all my guests, and this might be a good point to talk about it since we bring it up polymath a lot. What is a polymath to you?
So I've touched on it a little bit. I
Mhm.
lump polymath, Renaissance man, jack of all trades, generalist. I lump all those into the same thing. I consider them synonyms for the same kind of person, the same kind of mentality. But I consider it someone who is actively trying to develop a number of skills to
Mm,
get pretty good at a lot of things. As opposed to a specialist, I consider that to be someone who is getting good at one very specific thing. That is their life. That's what they dedicate themselves to. The polymath is someone who says, I'm not doing that. I am going to dedicate myself to a number of skills. Maybe it's just two,
mm,
maybe it's three, maybe it's four, maybe it's a countless number of skills. But someone who says, I'm not going to be a specialist, I'm going to learn a bunch of different things and put them all together, get pretty good at a lot of stuff.
yeah.
Mhm.
And you're lumping them all together, and that lump is who you are. That's why I like interviewing people like yourself who have many different skills. It's like you might have two polymaths side by side. They might both have the same science background or maybe the same uh, arts background or something like that. They have some overlap, but the other areas of their life are different. And so even though they have one or two overlaps of knowledge, even their opinion on those areas will be different. And it's interesting to think about how no polymath is alike or it's the same.
Yeah. For example, like when I was in school and I was predict who you are,
Mm,
and for me, my degree was probably the least interesting part of who I was as a person because I go to school, I study business. Like, okay, it's probably the most boring degree that you could possibly get in school, if I'm being totally honest. But it's everything outside of that that separates me from all my other classmates there. And it's all the stuff outside of there that led me to so many other opportunities that I wasn't going to get otherwise.
mm.
Like, yeah.
Being in college got you that networking opportunity. So,
Okay.
how does one take a generalized approach to life?
So, first and foremost, when I think about taking a generalized approach, first thing I feel like you have to do is you have to make the active decision I want to do this.
Mm,
Because if you do not decide that this is the kind of lifestyle I want to live, you're probably not going to get there by accident. Because there's a certain, I don't remember the quote exactly, but it's along the lines of if you don't set your priorities, other people will set them for you,
mm,
where you have to decide, I'm going to live a more generalized lifestyle. I'm going to actively seek out weird random skills to add to my skill stack to develop and shape myself in my own ways. Or if you don't actively do that, you're more likely to be influenced by other people's opinions to say, oh, my parents want me to go to school to get a certain degree, to get a certain job, to live that lifestyle of being the specialist, the traditional normal lifestyle of this is what I'm going to do with my life, which nothing wrong with it if that's what you want to do. But if you want to take the step towards being a polymath, then you have to make that intention first and foremost. So once
yeah.
you have that in place, then I feel like you have to decide, well, what am I curious about? What do I really want to know? What do I want to do? And there's a great question here that I love to ask. So it's a two-part question, but it can only be asked once. So first part of the question is, what do you want? Then I would advise people to pause, think about it, write stuff down. And once they do that, once they write everything out that they can think, this is what I want, then we ask the second question, what do I want to want? Where it's easier to see what is it that I personally really want? Because typically the first list is the stuff that other people expect of us. They might say, I want a big house. I want
Mhm.
to get married and have certain kids. I might want a certain job. I might want to do this XYZ thing, which, sure, that might be what you really want. but it might also just be expectations that you sort of adopted for yourself in some ways. So that second question of what do I want to want is sort of another way of asking, what do I really, really want? And I feel like when I talk to people about that, that's when I really start to pull out pieces of, oh, you actually want to learn how to dance? You actually want to learn music? You want to learn how to be an entrepreneur and start your own business? That might be a good way to start.
Mhm.
Then once you have certain things picked out of what you want to do, then go out and start doing research and set a deadline for yourself to do research. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone who says, I'm going to write this book. And 2 years later, they still say, I'm going to write this book because they're stuck in that research phase. Don't worry, it happens to everyone. It happens to everyone at some point. I know I've definitely fallen victim to the analysis paralysis trap, but one of the best ways to overcome it is to set a deadline of, I have to actually start by this day. And if
Mhm.
I don't, then I'm just not going to do it at all. Where you have maybe like 2 or 3 weeks where you're going to just research, learn everything you possibly can about the thing, and once that time frame is up, you have to actually just do the thing because you probably know enough to get started,
Right.
and most people never get started. If you start doing something, you're ahead of 99% of people. There are more people who have published books who have gotten best-selling status compared to people who say I want to write a book who have never actually written that book.
Yeah.
It's it's amazing to me. The simple
Especially
act of
just
starting with intention.
and just sometimes just starting in general too.
Yep. Mhm.
So there's a few different things I wanted to go off of there too. Trying to remember, I think the quote you shared, I remember hearing Tim Ferriss talk about at one point,
Mhm.
and it was interesting how he brought it up, but he also talked about what he did to try to go out of his comfort zone. So it wasn't just like go out and learn and make the decision to do it. It was also a matter of really pushing yourself to your kind of like not breaking points, but just pushing past what your embarrassment level is, and like just he walked down
Mhm.
the street in purple parachute pants just to like have that experience and just to be able to push himself out of his comfort zone, really start to make his own decisions and break out of that. I guess you could see the rat race or matrix if you want to go really nerdy.
Yeah, I think personally one of the best ways that you can start is actually with your style
Mm,
because I have a very distinct sense of style, a very distinct style, especially for the area I'm in. So currently, I'm moving at the end of the week, but currently I'm based in Orem, Utah, Provo, Utah. Very straight lace, like very normal, average personville. It's probably the most average place I could possibly be or think of. And when I walk around, I stick out like a sore thumb because I constantly dress in 70s or 60s shirts with loud, flashy colors. I've got my like my orange lens aviators. Like there is a sense of style there that just stands out. By actively changing your style so you stick out a bit, it's like there's a little something there. It's like,
yeah.
this is a little uncomfortable at first, but it feels good. Like,
I remember seeing like your profile picture and seeing that definitive kind of branding and style to that too. I'm
mhm,
wearing this shirt because this is essentially my red color for my brand,
mhm,
and I wanted to keep consistent with it. I try to wear this shirt or similar shirts when I do interviews so I can keep that consistency on point, and all the content I make follows the same kind of branding. I've actually changed my red recently, which is weird to me because out of the 7 years I made content, I never changed it. But I had a lot of other colors I did for my other brands, and being able to have that cohesion there, and like you are doing in real life too. I went to a conference a couple weeks ago and I wore a Hawaiian shirt, like a red kind of like Hawaiian shirt, and people were just kind of dumbfounded by it because I was kind of at a business conference. It's a little out of place, but I think it made people feel more comfortable around me. They got more casual, and that's kind of what we needed at that point because I needed to relate to people at different backgrounds. And so it's interesting how you can change things up like that.
it also makes you more memorable.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know. So it happens more often than I admit. So I'm horrible at remembering names, but it seems like almost anywhere I go, people seem to remember me. Like
Yeah.
there are people who will call out my name. It's like, hey, how have you been? It's like, I'm great. I don't know who you are.
Oh no.
But there's something about having a distinct sense of style that you can just claim for your own
Yeah.
that it's like one, you stick out, you feel kind of different, you get used to being uncomfortable. You kind of
Mhm.
just accept it after a while of, ooh, there's something kind of fun with this. And two, by standing out more, you also become more memorable to people where they want to help you out. They want you stick out in their mind and they say, I want to get to know that person more. I can't tell you how many opportunities have come because of the my willingness to stick out in certain places.
Let me turn off my sound again. I turned it off, but now it's back. All right, so it's interesting how like being able to stick out like that, as they say, stick out like a sore thumb. But by doing so, you separate yourself from the crowd, and I think that by having the tenacity to go through with that and being able to push past the social norms is kind of the main tenet of being like polymathic or jack of all trades, where you have to be able to push past the social norms right now. We shouldn't have to, because like I said, generalism is in the human DNA. There's a whole other tangent there, but we have to at the moment because of the way society's been built. And it's interesting how you have to have enough chutzpah or like oomph to be able to push past those norms.
Exactly. Take the small steps first, and one step at a time, you can build up to the bigger stuff.
What kind of bigger stuff are you going towards? Like, what are you working towards later in life?
Oh boy, what am
What do
I
you
working
want?
towards later in life? So right now, my main priority is
Mhm.
I want to grow my podcast, because there's like, sometimes it can take a bit to sit down and actually do the thing. But every time I sit down to work on episode notes, if I can break past that first 5 minutes of I don't want to do this, if I can break past that first 5 minutes and just do the thing, I love it. Every moment of it. It's so satisfying.
Mm.
There's working on that. I have invention stuff I'm always working on that. I'm trying to work on getting licensed to companies because I know what I'm good at. I like problem solving. I don't like the marketing side. I don't like the logistics side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a part of jack of all trades stuff. It's knowing what you actually want to do with it. Because just because you can learn a skill doesn't mean you necessarily should. I could go out and learn a lot about business logistics, but I don't really want to.
Yeah.
It's going to be a pain the entire time. I know I'm good at problem solving and inventing stuff and making prototypes and doing all that stuff. So I can license my ideas to companies. They can do the logistics. They can do more of the marketing. They can do the stuff I don't care about. Doesn't mean I'll make less money from it. Absolutely. But does it mean that I'm much more satisfied with my life? Yes, definitely. And by like the long term, so the question was long term life goals, that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Long term, I just want to keep doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are so many projects I have piling up of, oh, I really want to make this thing. Almost all my projects are like, I want to make this thing. Very rarely is it just a skill in particular, but skills always come from the projects. There's just so many things I want to make. There's so many episodes I want to record. There's so many people I want to talk to. And it's just an endless fountain of, I just want to keep working. Definitely a workaholic, but
Yeah. Me too.
fun workaholic.
There's a lot of things that I wanted to jump onto there because you brought a lot of ideas to front of mind. One of the first things is that, like, first off, I've been in the content creation space for a while. So if you ever want to pick my brain too, even on the show, we can maybe talk about it if you want to. Actually, I made my new show where I interview content creators specifically because I wanted to be able to talk shop with other creators because I love the niche, the actual niche of content creation, the topic of it. And you talked about kind of having that tenacity to push past the boring part, if you will, like just getting started, the first 2 minutes of it. There's certain tasks where you should do that and you should push past that boring part. And like you said, it's very satisfying that you did it. Like, wow, I got past my mental laziness, if you will. Like editing these interviews have been my biggest weakness, where it's like, actually, I would have grown a lot farther or a lot more, I mean, in the last few years had I just edited quicker or perhaps in this case delegated it. I realized that while my skill of editing is pretty decent, I actually learned a lot and I've used multiple different video editors at this point. I didn't want to pursue it any deeper. I didn't want to learn motion graphics. I didn't want to learn, color grading too deeply or anything like that. Even audio grading as well in some cases. And I learned that that's one of the few things I need to delegate. I recently found a couple people to help me edit the long form videos, and now I can focus on editing the short ones and actually make more progress. The interviews are secondary to my main solo stuff that I do on the channel, but they're the only thing that's actually been on the channel for a while because the interviews are so much fun to do. I can record so many of them. Point is, there are certain skills where I should push past that breaking point. You should push past that breaking point. There's certain things we should also delegate too. If you don't like marketing or logistics, maybe you could use AI or something like that. You have a audio only show, so you might have to use like Headliner or something like that to make clips versus like Opus Clip, which is what I use because it's video based. But it'd be interesting to think about, like, what if you just put all your podcast into a visualizer, make a visualizer out of that, then you can toss it into tools like Opus or other ones out there and do all the clipping for you automatically. And that way you don't have to worry about it. You just schedule it out, call it a day. Yeah, things like that to make it easier for you.
Hmm. Yep, I do currently use some AI tools for stuff, such as for actually my blog content. What I do currently is I take my every podcast transcript. Well, I'll take the episodes, I'll put it into an AI transcript writer thing.
Mm.
I'll take those transcripts and put it into a different tool, and then I have prompts I've crafted over the past few months that give me good enough outputs where I'm satisfied using them for all my social media posts. Since I prefer doing written content opposed
Mm.
to video content, and I do technically still do video stuff. It's just a simple video visualizer. It's just
Yeah.
not super fancy. But I use AI to write all my social media content. I use it to generate images I put alongside it. I use it to write the blog posts I put with it. I use it to generate the keywords that I might optimize for. So definitely, like AI stuff, so helpful. I do not know what I would do if I did not have some of these AI
Yeah.
tools. I do not want to do a lot of this stuff. I hate social media with a burning passion, but I
Mm-hmm.
recognize it's kind of the like you kind of need it.
Yeah, especially if you're a content creator. I actually just pulled up your channel too because I wanted to see what all the kind of visualizer and stuff like that on there. You have that kind of waveform around the profile picture, for example. At least yours actually looks
Mhm.
pretty nice. A lot of times people just do get kind of lazy with it and just put it just straight onto it using the automation per se. At least yours has nice text and good background, stuff like that. And I'm just
Yeah, I've
thinking,
tried to make something that's decent. I know it's
yeah,
not great, but it's good enough.
it's better to not using video at all, if you will.
Yeah,
And while my opinion is that you should do video and that kind of thing, I don't want to push anybody towards that. And if you,
I'll
like we
get
talked
to it
about it,
eventually.
you'll get to it eventually. Exactly. And the more
Yeah.
importantly that we talked about earlier, audio is your way of being. Like this is what
Mhm.
you express it yourself, and that's most important. Anyways, the quality is still there. I can still listen to it on YouTube. Most interviews, anyways, on YouTube you listen to. Like you just open up the tab of YouTube tab and you move on to doing something else.
Yeah.
So
Great second monitor content.
yeah, that was like yeah, exactly. And my point is though too, like eventually I need to actually get better at doing. I don't have any podcasts written out. Like I don't have the written posted them because I wanted to do it a little bit more unique. Whereas like I have a AI summary, or yeah, AI summary, then my written blog post based off the mental model of the guest. I don't know how I'm going to calculate that, but that was the goal.
Mm.
And then using the YouTube description, so all the links and the timestamps, stuff like that. And then I'll have the transcription underneath that. And so that way it's really long, so it's great for SEO, but it's also very human centric at the beginning. So the human just gets to the top. Here's what it's about. Here's the more meat of it that I'm writing out for you. And then if you want to listen to it or watch it, there's the description there. And then SEO purposes, the transcription's there at the bottom. So that's what the
Mhm.
goal was. But I'm like trying to figure out how to do all that and that kind of thing. Now I have over 100 interviews. It's like, oh, it's a lot.
Yep. Just one step at a time. That's all
Yeah.
we can do.
Well, I know that we'll keep talking about that if you get me going. So I figured I'll move on a little bit here. Can you explain the book you co-authored, Mentors Make Men?
Yep. So before I dive into that,
Yeah.
the book is currently delisted.
Okay.
Had a little spat with Amazon and a couple other things about that. I was testing some things out with some other books and ended up getting all my books delisted. Still have the
Oh,
manuscript, so I'm probably gonna rewrite it, fix a few things, and just republish it under like a different under a different publishing stuff.
yeah.
But essentially, this was a book that I wrote a little over a year ago now, and it's I started off. This is actually an interesting way to write a book. I did all the research myself since I was super deep into men's psychology and evolutionary psychology at the time,
Mhm.
and I wanted to find a book dedicated to men to see this is how you can really develop a good masculine mentality, like a good like I don't entirely know how to describe it. I could have described it much better when it first came out,
It's
but I
okay.
just haven't thought about it much since. But the idea of it was to help men grow through nurturing better relationships with other men.
Mhm.
Because one of the stats that I referenced in that book is the loneliness epidemic that's been rushing around the world, where I believe it was 1950. Perhaps I'm wrong on that date, but the average person had, like, the average man, like, about, how do I phrase this properly? About 3% of men at that point had zero close friends. Compare
Mhm.
that to, I believe this most updated stat that I used was 2018. The average man. Nope, that's not the way to put it. Uh, my brain is just
What was the
short-circuiting.
percentage of men at that point?
Yes, thank you. 15% had
Mm.
no close friends in as of about 2018. 1950, 3%. 2018, 15%. It's a 5x increase.
Mm-hmm.
And it just continues to look like that's going to continue to increase over time. And I thought to myself, why is that happening? And a lot of it was just because men did not have, like, we've lost this bond of brothers, this brotherhood that we used to have together. I dig into some of the history and the psychology of what like smaller tribes and what smaller communities do for men, and since this is a book all about men, but a lot of these same principles apply to women as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to dig into this and see what can we do about that today. And I try to make an active, like, the book is supposed to be a way of teaching men this is how you can regain that brotherhood, how you can regain some of those things. And I've tried to apply many of those principles in my life. It's worked quite well for me. I may not be the most outgoing social person. Like, I have a very limited number of friends, and I keep it that way intentionally
Mm.
because I like having this small band of brothers, this small band of people that I can always turn to. And it's helped me so much in my life. So I try to recreate that and help other people get that as well.
I think also too that was 6 years ago. There might be a updated stat that we should probably look up as well at some
Mm-hmm.
point because after 2020 and the quarantine situation, I think a lot of men have that. It's probably more higher now at this point.
Oh, definitely. And then I briefly touched on this, but I actually wrote this book in a kind of interesting way where I did all the research up front myself. And then what I ended up doing was I did the research, I wrote the outline for it, and then I worked with a ghostwriting company where I had them do the first draft for me,
Mhm.
where I gave them the outline and I gave them all my research, said, this is what I roughly want. And then afterwards, I got the first draft back and I edited the entire thing,
Mhm.
where I essentially rewrote maybe like 80% of the book. So
But it
probably
helped you
would have just
get
been
an
faster.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easier to work with a bad draft and just rewrite the whole thing than to start from scratch.
Mm.
And certainly, I have a couple more books going on right now where I am going it just from scratch, which is honestly going all right, and probably would have been faster if I did that to begin with. But this is my first book. I had
Yeah.
some interesting ideas I wanted to play with. It's like you live, you learn.
Well, a couple different things I wanted to mention too, because the first thing I'm writing my own book, and I kind of started more from an outline perspective. I didn't think that might help me maybe like if I just have somebody help like an AI something like that come up with an idea for the chapter and I just rewrite it. That way I can kind of idea like this is what I want to get from it or something like that. That might be interesting. But there's also when it goes back to content creation, I understand what you're talking about when you go deep into something, like when you're really into the weeds on a certain subject, you just get really into it. Like when metaverse was really popping off couple years back, I got really into that subject and was trying to learn about it. And when I was researching all these different tools and websites and what the topics were and what blockchain is again, I got all that information stuck in my head. And what I really think that's really important for polymath people is to be able to get that out, input and output. And through content, we can make blog posts, we can make books, which are really big, but there's a thing that some content creators call a blockbuster post, where it's super informationally dense. And so, like, if my normal blog posts are 1,000, 1,500 words, because they're decently long, I think usually most people are between 5 to 1,500 words for a blog post. A blockbuster post, like in some of my cases, are like 7,000 words, maybe as low as 3,000, but there's a lot of videos and a lot of links and a lot of resources. And so those are the posts where you just put as much information as possible. And it's a way for you to not only get the concrete knowledge a little bit more cemented in your brain too, where you're like, okay, these are the information, here's the details. If you could explain it simply, then you understand it well, like Richard Feynman said. And by making content, you are essentially explaining it to somebody. And that's a good way to make it more stable in your head.
Interesting. I've never heard about blockbuster posts, but now that I'm thinking about it, I've definitely read a couple of those.
Mm-hmm. There was one point
Yeah.
where I was like, I think I wrote about the Kardashev scale of like different civilizations. There was one point I was really into. I love Kung Fu Panda, for example, the trilogy. I haven't watched a new one yet, but like the Kung Fu Panda trilogy has a lot of philosophy and a lot of lessons to be learned from it that people do not realize it's there. And there's been a ton of people who have realized it and they made video essays on it. And so like I've seen a lot of movies out there. Like Star Wars obviously has a ton. It's a big popular franchise. Kung Fu Panda is not at the same level as that, but I'm pretty sure there's almost not an equal amount, but there's a surprisingly close amount of video essays on these two like franchises, and it's surprising considering how small Kung Fu Panda is compared to Star Wars. My point is, there's a lot of great videos. A lot of people haven't seen it. I consolidated it into that blockbuster post and added my own 2 cents and my own thoughts based on these different philosophies and different styles. And so it's just interesting to think about, like, you can create something really unique with a blockbuster post, and it's not as long as a book, but it's more important than a regular blog post or podcast or video. It's not just written;
Mhm.
it's also all three content types.
Guess it's also another good touch point to see, does this content actually resonate with my audience or with
Mm-hmm.
a audience out there before you want to dedicate yourself to writing a main book or
Mm-hmm.
spending a lot more time on something. Which I guess that's probably something I also should have done before writing the book, because like, was it kind of successful? Yeah, a bit. Like, it did reasonably well before I delisted it, but like,
You
definitely I should have vetted the content more before dedicating so much time and money into writing it.
I think you did fine. I think it was a lesson well learned, and you learned how to submit a book. You learned how the book world operates more. You also learned how to write a book. You realized that the method you chose was not the most ideal for you. You're going to do something different next time, and you're going to make a second edition, so you can improve the book. Books and blockbuster posts, also known sometimes as pillar posts too, are great ways to disseminate your content from there. So
Mhm.
James Clear marketed his book by taking quotes and making images from those quotes from his newsletter and from his book, and was able to make a ton of content just based on repurposing that same thing he already made. There's some people who do it the opposite way. They make a book out of all their blog posts too, but you can also go the other way down. You can make blog posts on different topics. So each chapter, then within the chapter, different bullet points in there. And you can make a whole blog post on just one paragraph. And it's a great way to market the book, but it's also a great way to keep those ideas in the front of mind and spreading out more.
I guess the same principle as podcasters taking their full podcast transcript or full podcast and
Mm-hmm.
breaking that down into clips or
Mm-hmm.
just shorter videos or other stuff, just text form. Never
It's
really thought about it
repurposing.
that way, but thanks
Yeah.
for opening my mind to that idea.
Of course. Well, and it's interesting to think about when it comes to like podcasts. Like you mentioned earlier, how you use it for like social posts and stuff like that, like tweets, or even those same tweets could then be turned using like TweetPic or something like that into images for Instagram. And each podcast again could be a visualizer, but then you could use like Headliner and Zuddle and Wave are these visualizer tools for clips. You take your podcast and it finds the clips for you, at least some of them do, and turns them into visualizer clips for TikTok and Instagram, stuff like that. I don't see those as often anymore now that we have a lot of podcasts are video. So they use like Opus Clip or other tools like that to chop it up. But it's interesting to think about, there's not just video, there's blog posts. People make newsletters now. They might do a video like reaction to what we're talking about. So I make a video based on what I learned from you, Orion, and that kind of thing. I don't do that, but that might be an interesting thing to do. It's a
Mhm.
different kind of repurposing, but it's continuing it on.
Yeah. Wow, I've got you talking about content stuff again.
I know. Sorry.
It always comes back to content.
Yeah. Well, I guess we got time for maybe one more question here, unless you have something really pressing to talk about. But I wanted to ask
Shoot.
you, what? Oh, shoot the
Shoot.
question.
Yeah.
As an inventor, what all have you created, or able to discuss at least, or you can maybe discuss the process if you don't want to talk about the inventions themselves.
Yeah, so I currently cannot discuss the inventions themselves, but I can talk about some of the process of going through and actually creating something to. So I like to target the licensing market where
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking and solving problems and bringing them to companies where they do all the distribution, but you can do the same thing and apply it to venturing or trying to bring it to market yourself.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, so this is the biggest mistake I see in almost every inventor. It's a mistake that I've fallen victim to a number of times as well. Inventors love, especially the engineering type people, they love to create things, but they're not good at solving problems. Many people will like create an invention, say, look at the thing I made, like treat it like their baby, but they forget at the very beginning, oh wait, this is supposed to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So they create a thing and then they bring it to a marketer or they bring it to someone and they say, can you help me find a problem for this to solve? Which if you go at it from that perspective, it's going to be so much harder. It can still work, don't get me wrong. Like, you can create things first and then go find problems for them or create problems for them, such as Chia Pet. Like, they created that first and then they created, quote unquote, a problem for it to solve. Of, didn't you know that you always wanted to have a potted plant that when you grow it, it was Bob Ross and you grow it in afro for him? Like, isn't that a problem you always had? Like,
Yeah.
wow, I never realized I had that problem before now, but I do have that problem. So you can take that perspective. It is much harder, but the way that I recommend it, and most inventors will recommend it, is that start with the problem first. Be constantly dissatisfied with things. Always
Mhm.
be looking for problems in the world of this thing irritates me, this thing bugs me. I want to solve this problem. I don't know how I'm going to solve it, but I want to solve it in some way. It could be as simple as going and watching. Actually, this is what I did with, well, I didn't do this personally, but this is what I've discussed with a number of different people before, where they go and they just watch people at work for sometimes upwards of 2 or 3 hours. They just watch people to see what problems are they having in their job. A good example of this is the maids at hotels. They will often they'll clean the hotel room, and one of the most irritating parts is the sheets on the bed, trying to get the fitted sheets over the mattress, and it takes so much time for them to do. It's always the longest part of the process, and it's
Mm.
costing the hotels money. So what do? They ended up creating this new sheet idea of, instead of having a elastic fitted sheet that wraps around the mattress, they created a fitted sheet that has a long piece of rope that you can essentially throw it over the mattress,
Mm.
pull on the rope, throw it underneath the mattress, and it's fitted in less than 5-10 seconds,
Mm.
compared to the upwards of 2 to 3 minutes that it might have taken them to try to squeeze that fitted sheet around the mattress and hope to God they are doing it right.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's this problem first mentality that if you can get that, everything else becomes much easier.
It's interesting. And I think it started making me think like, am I marketing towards the opposite or the problem first kind of thing too? Yeah.
Mhm. Like, even with content,
Mhm.
like, it trying to figure out what's the problem or the thing that you're trying to sell people. Like, if you can solve a problem, great. But for podcasts like ours, maybe the problem isn't like it is a problem per se, but it's selling a benefit or selling a lifestyle,
Yeah.
since there's different levels of it. But yeah, when it comes to inventing, problem first inventing has to be the best way to do it.
I think so. For this show, for example, my motivation behind the interviews was I wanted to give a polymathic person a spotlight to show off all their different multidisciplinary skills. Because most shows narrow you down. I've been on 70 plus podcasts myself, and only maybe half a dozen of them actually let me show off who I am fully. And did I enjoy most of these episodes, like most of these interviews? Sure. I had a lot of great experiences, got to share the swimming part of my life or the karaoke part of my life or the content creator part of my life. But the thing is, there's been only a few shows where I got to really express that polymathic side of things. And I wanted to give people an opportunity to that. There's been plenty of times where I had a guest like yourself on the show who knew who they were. They knew who I like, that you're jack of all trades, you have that embodiment in your life, and you're working towards building that jack of all trades life. There's been a lot of times though where I had people on the show where I recognized they were polymathic, they were jack of all trades, but they didn't fully see it themselves, and you could almost see it in the interview itself when the lights in their eyes light up, and like, wow, like I didn't really see it like that, but now I do. Thank you, and that kind of thing, and that feeling was really motivation for me.
It's so satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Being able to help highlight that part of themselves.
Absolutely.
Well, you have your show, a lot of content you're making as well, and you're rewriting that book. Where can people find you online?
The two best places would be Cast of All Trades, wherever you get podcasts. And then if you want to see everything else I'm doing, I have a link tree. So
Mhm.
linktr.ee/Orion Siebert. You can see everything I'm working on up to date there. And if something new comes up, then I'll put it on there. But generally, that's just the best place to look.
I have links for you in the description, so don't worry. And then, what is our call to action for the audience today?
Today's call to action is, what do you want and
Mm.
what do you want to want? Decide what your intentional life is going to be and go out and do it.
I love that. So, once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Orion Siebert on the Polymath Polycast. Thank you for being here.